and welcome to Bad Book Club, where I, Jade, a silly goose with an English degree, read classic and popular literature so you don't have to. Hello, Bad Book Club friends. Welcome back to another episode. In this one, we are diving into one of my favorite books ever. So I have a lot of favorite books depending on the genre that I'm reading, but when it comes to literary fiction and to reading for beauty and literary craft, Jesmyn Ward is one of my favorite authors ever. Her books are just so beautiful. So on that vein, what is literary fiction? Because Jade isn't all fiction literary since it's written down. Well, that's true. However, literary fiction is, in my opinion, a bit of an underrated genre. Most people I know who read literary fiction are writers and English majors, and people otherwise, I think, read it a little less. If you do, congrats, you know what I'm talking about. But basically, literary fiction is its own kind of genre with its own expectations. It's so interesting to me because of this reason. There aren't usually happy endings. So what I mean by that is that in literary fiction, the goal of the story is not always personal growth, to find love, to fix a problem. Usually it's just a snapshot of a person's life when they were affected by something in any way. So think of Catcher in the Rye. Like, that wasn't a happy story, but it was a snapshot of an important weekend in his life where something happened to him, and he was processing something. So that's a lot of literary fiction. It's very open-ended. It asks questions. So it's just interesting. I think it's really well done, and I really like it because so much emphasis is put on the words themselves and the sentences and the art of writing. It's kind of an old-fashioned way to write, but anyway, I just like it a lot, and I think it's really pretty. The only other book we've read that kind of deals with that in a similar way is Where the Crawdads Sing, but that one was a bit more sensational plot-wise, which was really interesting, but a lot of literary fiction I read is not that sensational. It doesn't include, murder or, court cases. It's usually not that wild, but it can be, so whatever you want. Writing and reading is whatever you want it to be, but I really like literary fiction. It's one of my favorite genres, but it takes some time because you have to read through it and really feel it and understand it. But it's beautiful if you take the time to get into it. Another favorite thing I like about literary fiction is magical realism. So what that is it's kind of the idea that magic exists, but not in the I can fly way, but in the plants asked me to water them way. Like the characters have a sort of sixth sense connection with the universe. They see things or energy, love, emotion, any number of things. That's always fun and exciting for me. I love reading characters that seem to have an odd connection and view of the world. So because of that, my analysis for this book will be mostly focused on themes rather than critiques. I had a friend tell me recently that I have different standards for different books, and I told him that I most definitely do, because I hold books to different standards based on what they claim to be doing. And what I mean by that is that I will hold this book to a different standard than I hold Twilight to, because Twilight is about entertainment. When I read Twilight and I have a moment that I'm not entertained, I'll tell you, because while it's subjective, that's what Stephanie Myers is trying to make me feel. She's trying to entertain me. And with Crawdads, I had a lot of thoughts on the ending, but if you remember, I love the prose, the characters, and the writing. The plot was a bit more sensational and brave, so I had thoughts on it, but mostly the themes and thoughts that it provoked about nature, people, and more is very literary fiction, and literary fiction wants me to ask these questions. So I hope you all know, when I read these books and talk to you about them, I really do analyze them and discuss the book based on what the genre is, what it's trying to make me feel, what the author has said about their work, if it's written in a different time, and more. It might seem like I jump around in my expectations, and of course, my own opinions and biases are there, but books have to be measured a little differently because It by Stephen King and Little Women by Alcott are just not trying to do the same thing. I can't hold them to the same standards because they're just completely different. It's apples and oranges. So anyway, sorry for that tangent. Let's talk about the book. So anyway, here's some cool facts about Jesmyn Ward and this book. This book was listed by the New York Times as one of the best 10 books of 2017, and Jesmyn Ward has won awards for previous works, including the National Book Award for Fiction in 2011 and the Alex Award. She's also from Mississippi herself, where most of her books take place. Lastly, my favorite fact about this book specifically, which mentions a prison called Parchman Prison, that is a real place, a maximum security prison in Mississippi, and Ward is quoted as saying that all the events that surround Parchman Prison in this book are based on actual events that occurred. So that's it's a lot, but I think you'll understand in a second. I'm not going to give you any more exposition. I'm just going to jump in and let's see what's going on. This book is written in first person, but it switches between the characters of Jojo, Richie, and Leonie. It begins with Jojo. Today is his 13th birthday. He goes with his grandfather, who he calls Pop, to slaughter a goat to prove that he can handle death like a man. Jojo tells us about his mom, who has cancer, and his own father, a white man named Michael, who is currently incarcerated at Parchman Prison. Jojo also tells us that he is named after Michael's father, Big Joseph, who he has never met. Unfortunately, while they are skinning the goat, Jojo gets sick, and Pop sends him to go check on his baby sister, Kayla. She's awake inside the house and asking for Jojo around the age of 2 or 3. Jojo says he hasn't called Leonie Mama since he was young. And this is a quote. "That was when there was more good than bad. When she'd push me on the swing, Pop hung from one of the pecan trees in the front yard, or when she'd sit next to me on the sofa and watch TV with me, rubbing my head. Before she was more gone than here. Before she started snorting crushed pills. Before all the little mean things she told me gathered and lodged like grit in a skinned knee." I just love that. He also describes a time when Mam and Pop went to the hospital once, and Leonie left him at home alone, and he stepped on the lid of a can when he ran to hide from the local vagrant, Pop's half-brother, Stag, and he had to wait for Pop to get home and pull it out of his foot. In a quick second, he pulled it out, and I hollered. It was the first time I thought Pop didn't do something good. Oh, there's going to be lots of reactions with me like that. I'm really sorry. I just love the prose so much. Pop tells Jojo how when they were 15, Stag was beaten by a white man, and he and Stag were taken together to Parchman Prison, where Pop met a boy named Richie, only 12 years old, who had been caught stealing food for his family. We also learned that Jojo has a sense for knowing what animals are thinking. Sometimes when I looked at the fat pig with splashed black spots on his side, he'd grunt and flap his ears, and I'd think he meant to say, "Scratch here, boy." When the goats licked my hand and head-butted me while nibbling at my fingers and bleated, I heard, "The salt is so sharp and good, more salt." When the horse Pop keeps bowed his head and shimmied and bucked so that his sides gleamed with wet red Mississippi mud, I understood. I could leap over your head, boy, and oh, I would run, and you would never see anything more than that. I could make you shake. But anyway, since it's Jojo's birthday, Leonie gets home with a cake for him. Sadly, though, Mam always got him red velvet, and Leonie accidentally got him a baby shower cake. They sing happy birthday to him over Mam's hospital bed in the back room. When the happy birthday song starts, it's only Leonie. She has a pretty voice, the kind of voice that sounds good singing low but sort of cracks on the high notes. Pop is not singing. He never sings. When I was younger, I didn't know because I'd have a whole family singing to me, Mam, Leonie, and Michael. But this year when Mam can't sing because she's sick and Kayla makes up words to the melody and Michael's gone, I know Pop isn't singing because he's just moving his lips, lip-syncing, and there's no noise coming out. Leonie's voice cracks on Dear Joseph, and the light from the 13 candles is orange. No one but Kayla looks young. Pop is standing too far out of the light. Mam's eyes have closed to slits in her chalky face, and Leonie's teeth look black at the seams. There's no happiness here. Happy birthday, Jojo, Pop says. Isn't that rough? Before Jojo can blow out the candles, however, the phone rings. Thinking it might be Michael, Leonie runs to the living room holding the cake. Jojo knows it's Michael, knows that he is telling Leonie he's getting out of prison this week. That's the first chapter, and I already love the story and the characters and Jojo. I love the way we learn things about the characters, like through their interactions. The way that Jojo carries Kayla while they sing happy birthday, because Leonie picked her up and she pushed against her and cried for Jojo. Doesn't that tell you so much about Leonie and Jojo and Kayla's relationship? I love Pop because he's so quiet and strong. I think if you weren't used to literary fiction, the first chapter might come off a little slow, but by the end we get that call from the prison in and things really get moving. And I also think with prose like this, you kind of have to let it wash over you and just feel the rhythm of it. She uses long sentences and similes and repetition. So if you're reading slowly, you might miss those things or get too bogged down in it. It's less about what it physically means and more about the feeling it gives you, in my opinion. But anyway, let's move on. The next chapter is from Leonie's view. She tells us that after talking with Michael, she goes to work a few shifts at a bar called The Cold Drink. Her white coworker and friend, Misty, has a boyfriend who is also in Parchman and is a great worker because she's always high. That night, Leonie goes to her house and they do cocaine and talk. Leonie, like she always does when she's high, sees a vision of her brother Given, who was shot in high school on a hunting trip when he beat a white kid in a bet by Michael's cousin. Leonie met him when Michael apologized to her for it. Leonie decides to take the kids with her to Parchman despite Pop's disagreement, and Mam tells her to bring Misty. Leonie realizes in that moment that her mom is dying, and remembers how when she was younger her mom told her about their family and how they have a certain power with herbs, living things, and the dead, and how she might have that gift. I think it runs in the blood, like silt in river water, builds up and bends and turns over sunk trees. She waves her fingers. Rises up over the water in generations. My mama ain't have it, but heard her talk one time that her sister, Tante Rosalie, did, that it skips from sister to sister, child to cousin, to be seen and used. Leonie, unsure if Michael's parents will pick him up, stops by their house to drop off a letter telling them that she would pick him up. Big Joseph is mowing the lawn, and when he sees her car, he starts riding at her on it, and she speeds away just as he pulls out a rifle, which is not very friendly at all. Very uncool. Jojo wakes up 2 days after his birthday, and Leonie tells him that they have no time for him to warm up his birthday leftovers for breakfast. He packs his things in a grocery bag, the only bag he has, and he kisses Mam goodbye and hugs Pop before he gets in the car. I stepped in to Pop and hugged him. I couldn't remember the last time I had, but it seemed important to do it then, to fold my arms around him and touch my chest to his, to pat him once, twice on the back with my fingertips and let him go. He's my Pop, I thought. He's my Pop. And they leave in the car, watching Pop out the window. The only animal I saw in front of me was Pop. Pop with his straight shoulders and his tall back, his pleading eyes, the only thing that spoke to me in that moment and told me what he said without words. I love you, boy. I love you. Oh, he's so cute. I love it. They drive off, Misty sweating in the front passenger seat, and Jojo likes to look at her. He also finds a small pouch in his bag filled with a tooth, a rock, and some other odds, and a note from Pop that says, "Keep this close." It's a sort of, I think it's pronounced grease. I've only ever read it. I just realized this. Bag of protection. That is so adorable, of sweet, stoic Pop. And he really does love Jojo and Kayla, even Leonie. It's adorable. They stop for gas, and Leonie won't let Jojo buy something to drink, so he just stands outside in the rain and drinks the rain. And he remembers Pop telling him the story of his time at Parchman, how they put Richie on something called the long line to plow and pick and plant the fields. That was our whole world, the long line. Men strung out across the fields, the trusty shooter stalking the edge, the driver on his mule, the caller yelling to the sun, throwing his working song out like a fishing net. Us caught and struggling. Once my grandmama told me a story about her great-grandmama. She'd come across the ocean, been kidnapped and sold. Her great-grandmama told her she learned that bad things happened on that ship. All the way until it docked, that her skin grew around the chains, that her mouth shaped to the muzzle, that she was made into an animal under the hot, bright sky, the same sky the rest of her family was under, somewhere far away in another world. I knew what it was to be made an animal, until that boy came out on the line, until I found myself thinking again, worrying about him. Isn't that so powerful? My poor book is like 90% highlighted with my favorite sentences. By the way, I like it so much. Pop tells him more about his family's philosophy and that everything has a spirit and everything must be in balance. He also tells him how Richie wasn't cut out for the work, so Pop did his work for him too, until Kenny Wagner, the inmate dog runner, spotted Pop and the dogs jumped at him happily, and Pop was brought over to work with the dogs. Despite all the evil things Kenny did, he would never hurt a woman. And Pop thinks about how there are some things men can't do. There are just some things they just can't do, like Richie. They stop again at a white woman's house that Misty knows. The house is run down, but inside there are boxes and boxes of food and other items. And the woman is coughing and sick, and it's making Leonie nervous. And Jojo and Kayla sit with her son, the lady's son, while he plays video games, and they watch as he loses his temper and then breaks the TV with his bat. The woman sees it and starts smacking him. And when Jojo goes to the restroom outside, he peers through the slats of their shed and sees the woman's husband cooking meth, which Jojo says is how Michael got into prison in the first place. Jojo steals some food and juice from their place and feeds it to Kayla when they get back on the road. Leonie tells us that Michael worked on the Deepwater Horizon, and after it exploded, that he was tormented and had nightmares, that she was worried about him when he started to lose weight, but she realized that he had figured out a new way to cope and make money without her. That's the drugs, obviously. Leonie and Misty have a packet of meth that was given to them by the woman that they put in a small compartment that Michael installed beneath the carpet of the passenger seat. And soon after, Kayla throws up in the car, not feeling good. And Leonie pulls over, letting Jojo comfort Kayla while she tries to find an herb to help, like Ma'am taught her. She picks some blackberry plants, which she thinks will help with the nausea. Jojo watches the wilting blackberry plants in the car, Kayla crying against him. He doesn't want Leonie to give them to Kayla. He tells us of the time that after he went to an aquarium, how Leonie bought him a beautiful green betta fish that he named Bubbly Bubbles, since it blew bubbles, and how he heard the fish tell him, big face, light, love, but that he ran out of the sample size of fish food that he came with and asked Leonie for more. She said she would and then forgot again and again until one day she said, give him some old bread. I figured he couldn't crunch like he needed on some old bread, so I kept bugging her about it, and Bubby got skinnier and skinnier, his bubbles smaller and smaller, until I walked into the kitchen one day and he was floating on top of the water, his eyes white, a slimy scrim like fat, no voice in his bubbles. Leonie kill things. Fun fact, I had several betta fishes when I was in college, and male bettas blow bubble nests when they're ready to mate and have babies, and they only feel ready to mate when they're happy. So fun facts about bettas, they really do blow bubbles, and when they do, they're happy. Also, bettas can recognize faces and voices, and I used to teach them tricks like jumping out of the water. They are adorable fishies, and I actually bought one really recently. I now have a betta fish. Fun facts. Anyway, sorry, back to the story. Eventually, they make it to another house, and it is Misty's lawyer, Al. Leonie boils the blackberry plant for Kayla and makes Kayla drink it all. Al and Misty and Leonie talk in the living room, and Jojo makes Kayla throw up the mixture, remembering once how Leonie tried to make a healing tonic for him, but it made him sicker, and when she threw it out, a neighborhood cat died after drinking it. Jojo dreams and remember parts of Pop's story, how Richie was whipped for breaking his hoe, and Pop tended to his back for him, how that night Kinney the dog runner escaped, and Pop couldn't get the dogs to follow their master's scent. Leonie, Al, and Misty get high that night and don't sleep, and the next day they drive to Parchman. Kayla is still feverish, not hungry, and her eyes are serious, and Jojo is very worried for her. Jojo himself is starving and thirsty, but doesn't want to eat Al's jellified oatmeal. And Leonie signs Michael out of prison, and outside they embrace and kiss, and neither of them really pay any attention to Jojo or Kayla. And while they're standing there, staring at the working fields, Kayla asks Jojo if he sees the birds, and Jojo responds. What you see, Kayla, I ask. All the birds, she says, and coughs. I look out at the fields, but I don't see birds. I squint for a second, I see men bent at the waist, row after row of them, picking at the ground, looking like a great murder of crows landed, and chattering and picking for bugs in the ground. One, shorter than the rest, stands and looks straight at me. See the bird, Kayla says, and then she lays her head on my shoulder. I blink and the men are gone, and it is just fog rolling, wisping over the fields that stretch out endlessly. So as you may have noticed, we've gotten to some magical realism in this book already with Jojo's intuition and Leonie seeing her brother given, but this is where the book gets more serious about it, and I'm going to talk more about it at the end, but here's where things get wild, so just be prepared. Anyway, Jojo remembers the last part of the story that Pop has shared with him, how Richie was feverish from his wounds despite the fact that Pop couldn't find an infection, and how Richie had told him that the dirt of this place was filling his mind and his soul, and how he was going home. Michael tries to say hello to Kayla, but she says no and clings to Jojo. In the car, Leonie gives Jojo and Kayla sandwiches that Al made for them, and Jojo wolfs his down and finishes what Kayla doesn't eat. Michael asks if something is wrong with Kayla, and Leonie says that she's feeling better. Immediately afterward, Kayla pukes over the back of her front seat, and Jojo pulls her out and comforts her. And Kayla cries and says, the bird, the bird. And then Jojo sees a skinny black boy with an afro blurred around the edges leaning against the window. And he says, I'm going home. So impressions so far. I told you this already, but this is one of my favorite books so far, and I love it. It's been so fun to reread it up until this point. I really didn't remember like any of it. And I think if you weren't used to it, it might come off a little slow at first, and the writing might seem a little dense, but about a third of the way in now, I personally am reading for Jojo and Kayla because I love them so much as characters. Jojo is the sweetest, most caring boy, and he loves Kayla. Leonie is so the worst. Her sections, though, really come across to me as someone who is so wrapped up in her own grief and pain and problems that she just takes them out on Jojo, and she can't care for him because she can't even care for herself. She feels that guilt, though, about not being able to do it, and she feels really sad whenever Kayla doesn't want to be in her arms and wants to go to Jojo instead of her. I think the inclusion of drugs really raises the stakes here. First of all, around young children, I think it makes Leonie worse as a parent and Michael worse as a parent. It also operates for Leonie as a way to see her brother, which is very interesting. But for the most part, the fact that drugs are included and Michael already went to prison for it, and now they're carrying it with them on their way to and from the prison, it really makes me, and the reader probably, worry for Jojo. And Leonie's attempts at concealment from her kids, her guilt about it, and her own nerves make me pity her. And I like her more even though she's a really bad mother. It's just one of those things where she knows she is and she feels bad about it. So self-aware at least. I think the inclusion of Misty is interesting because she plays off the other characters so well. So she's so similar to Leonie, but she's white. So we see where she thinks she's too good to do certain things, like be in the car, deal with Kayla's throw up. And Leonie resents her for that, I think. And we also see her operate as a sort of example of Jojo's burgeoning adulthood and masculinity. Kayla's great because she's just the most honest, and her reactions are so primitive. She just pushes away from Leonie and Michael and doesn't care about how they feel. And as you've noticed, she sees the same magical things that Jojo sees. The next chapter is from Richie's point of view. He says he knew that Jojo was River's son, and also River is Pop's name. I don't think I mentioned that before. He said that at first he woke up in the pines and talked to a white snake who turned into a black bird, and he flew with it, and then he tried to remember his death, and then he fell to the ground and haunted Parchman despite the fact that River wasn't there. He watches Jojo care for Kayla and wants to tell Jojo how River looked after him and how he died anyway, but doesn't. From Leonie's perspective, they arrive back at Al's. She washes Jojo and Kayla's clothes and tries to wash Kayla in the bathtub. Kayla shoves against her, and Leonie wants to hit her, but she doesn't. She gives her to Jojo and insults him about the baby fat on his tummy and goes to the living room to get high and have sex with Michael. They leave, Al giving them some sandwiches, and he's high too. Leonie tells us that she got pregnant at 17 and how her mom didn't like her obsessive love for Michael, how she acted like a dog around him. She tells us that when she told Ma'am she was pregnant, Ma'am told her she already knew that she had heard the baby. She offers to help her abort the baby if she wants, but Leonie says that she wants a piece of Michael. Michael alerts Leonie at this moment that the cops are behind them. They switch seats because Michael doesn't have a license, and Michael panics about the small bag of meth that they still have with them and how the compartment isn't opening. Leonie grabs the bag from his hand and swallows the whole thing and then pulls over. Upon hearing that they are coming from Parchman, the cop takes them out of the car, cuffs them, and Leonie is beginning to feel high. Jojo is taken out, and the cop panics when Jojo reaches for his back pocket and he pulls out his gun. Jojo is on the ground trying not to cry when Kayla leaps from Misty's arms and jumps on top of Jojo. Leonie is trying not to attack the officer. He searches their car. Misty picks Kayla up and she vomits on the police officer. Disgusted, he lets them go, and at this moment, Leonie sees Given. The next chapter is Jojo's perspective right before the police stopped them. Richie, sitting on the floor of the car, tells him they going to chain you. Jojo is pulled out and nervous reaches for Pop's bag in his back pocket. The man telling me sit like I'm a dog. Sit. So I do, but then I feel guilty for not fighting, for not doing what Kayla is. But then I think about Richie, and then I feel Pop's bag in my shorts, and I reach for it. Figure if I feel the tooth, the feather, the note, maybe I could feel those things running through me. Maybe I wouldn't cry. Maybe my heart wouldn't feel like it was a bird ricocheted off a car mid-flight, stunned and reeling. But then the cop has his gun out, pointed at me, kicking me, yelling at me to get down in the grass, cuffing me, asking me, "What you got in your pocket, boy?" as he reaches for Pop's bag. But Kayla moves so fast, small and fierce, to jump on my back. I should soothe Kayla, should tell her to run back to Misty, to get down and let me go, but I can't speak. The bird crawling up into my throat, wings spasming. What if he shoot her, I think? What if he shoot both of us? And then I notice Richie looking out of the car window, even though the cuffs are grinding into my wrists. He distracts me from the warm, close day, from Misty pulling Kayla away, but only for a second, because I can't help but return to this, Kayla's brown arms and that gun, black as rot, as pregnant with dread. Man, isn't that just so insanely powerful and poignant and really rough? Poor sweet Jojo. This part in the book was so crazy. I read it and I was like, oh my God, I can't. Don't shoot Joe. He was reaching for Pop's bag because he thought he was going to cry. That's just so sad. But anyway, they drive to the nearest gas station, and Michael makes Jojo go in and buy milk and charcoal for Leonie. Jojo also sneaks a lollipop in his pocket and pays for it, but he says no receipt because he doesn't want Michael to know he paid for it. Kayla knows he has it when he gets in the car, and he waits till Michael is distracted, giving Leonie the milk and charcoal mixture to throw up the drugs, and then he gives Kayla the lollipop. Richie tells Jojo the only way for him to go home is to know what happened to him, how he died. He says Jojo doesn't know anything about the world, like home, love, or time. From Richie's point of view, Jojo isn't innocent. He remembers how River saw a prostitute named Sunshine Woman because she wore yellow, how she told them the story of a black couple who were lynched and torn apart for brushing shoulders with a white woman on the street, how River had told her to stop, asked her to leave, how Richie had already known those things, but that River asking her to leave was love. How when Jojo had come to Parchman, a voice told him to follow, that Jojo would bring him home. Leonie daydreams about their alone time when they were teenagers, her and Michael. And she feels awful after the drugs and the dream she had where they were all drowning in water. And on the drive, she sees a sister and brother on the street. And behind her, Kayla is kicking her seat. And then Leonie leans back and slaps her hard and thinks to herself, that girl, so lucky, she has all her brothers. They get home, but Mam and Pop are gone. Michael wants to go to his parents' place, and Leonie does not. They argue, but they go. Leonie is holding Kayla when a wild hog crosses the street. Michael brakes and Kayla flies out of her hands, hits her head on the dash, faints, and then she wakes up and cries for Jojo. They get to the house and things are really tense. Big Joseph is mad when the kids are not polite and when they don't say hello to their grandma Maggie, who is trying but not really. He calls Leonie a terrible phrase, and Michael headbutts him and they fight. At an angry look in Jojo's eyes, she decides to take the kids out and they wait in the car. Michael cries into his mom's shoulder in the lawn and then joins them. They drive home and Pop is outside. He tells Leonie to see Mam, and Mam says that she wants to go. She wants to be possessed by someone called Maman Brigitte, the mother of the dead, and she hopes that she'll take her with her when she leaves. She asks Leonie to help her. Leonie cries heartbroken, remembering her mother's strong hands and mystery and power and beauty. From Jojo's perspective, he greets Pop and sits with him, happy to be back. Richie is upset that Pop can't hear him. Jojo and Kayla fall asleep on the couch, and Richie sings beneath the house all night. In the morning, they wake to bacon, and Michael reminds Jojo of a fishing trip they took together when he was younger, and when he told Jojo how Given had died. He says that he is here to stay, and then when Kayla doesn't get up off the floor when he asks her to, he hits her. Jojo goes to Mam, who apologizes to him because she says that she knew Leonie didn't have what she calls the mothering instinct whenever they went to the store together and she bought food for herself instead of her hungry child. Mam says that she tried her best to give him enough love to sustain him. Jojo asks her about ghosts, and she says that she won't be a ghost because they're usually born of violent deaths. Richie's perspective, he watches the family. He has a vision of an island with water, land, homes, and people, and he hears them singing. He watches Leonie walk to the cemetery and gather rocks for the death rites. She asks Given's grave for help, but hears nothing back. She walks back, drops to her knees in her mother's room, and tells her that she'll do it. Jojo tells us he could hear Richie singing through the floor that night. He finds Pop taking apart a fence that has been invaded, sorry, my bad, handwriting, by termites. He asks for the end of the story. Pop tells him with Richie watching. He said that another inmate named Blue raped a woman one day, and Richie caught him, and the two of them ended up running away together. The prison warden and sergeant and a gang of white men caught up with them and began skinning Blue alive and cutting off parts of his body. Pop knew Richie was next, so he kneeled down near him. I said, "It's going to be all right, Richie." He said, "You're going to help me? Riv, which way should I go?" I healed the dogs, held out my hands to him, light side out. Move slow, soothed him. I said, "We gon' get you out of this. We gon' get you away from here." Touched his arm. He was burning up. "I'm going home, Riv?" he asked. I squatted down next to him, the dog steady yipping, and I looked at him. He had baby hair on the edge of his scalp, Jojo. Little fine hair he'd had since he'd sucked at his mama's tit. "Yes, Reggie, I'ma take you home," I said. And then I took the shank I kept in my boot and I punched it one time into his neck, in the big vein on the right side. Held him till the blood stopped spurting. Him looking at me, mouth open, a child, tears and snot all over his face, shocked and scared until he was still. Pop tells Jojo he then let the dogs on him so the crowd wouldn't know that Pop had killed him first. Pop was released early from Parchman for catching Richie, and he says that he has smelled Richie's blood on his hands his entire life. Pop falls to the ground and Jojo hugs him. Richie screams and disappears. Meanwhile, in Mam's room, or in the house, Leonie is still seeing Given, and Kayla is saying that a blackbird is in Mam's room. Mam says Leonie is too late, but Leonie says the rites to summon the spirit anyway. Jojo comes in, and Kayla and him both see Given, who calls Jojo his nephew. Given tells Richie that she's not his mama, and then Given hugs her and says that he's taking her home. Mam dies. Jojo is furious at Leonie for summoning the spirit that killed her, and Leonie attacks Jojo, slapping him. Pop pulls her off, and then she tells Michael what happened, and they leave to get high. Jojo says that he and Kayla sleep in Leonie's bed now, since she is never home. If they are, she and Michael sleep on the couch. He says at night, sunset, that he understands why Leonie's a bad mother, why she hits him. To help the feeling, he takes walks. One time, he sees Richie by a tree, and he's confused why he hasn't gone home, even though he hears the song and learned about how he died. Jojo wishes he could see Given or Mam, but knows he won't. Richie climbs up the tree along with many other ghosts who had violent deaths. Jojo goes back to the house, and Kayla jumps from Pop's arms and talks to the tree. She says, "Go home," and they sway and shudder, their mouths open. Kayla begins to sing to them, and the ghosts smile. As they walk through the forest, Kayla comforts her brother. "Shh, like I am the baby and she is the big brother," says, "Shh." Like she remembers the sound of the water in Leonie's womb, the sound of all water, and now she sings it. "Home," they say, "home." And that's the end of the novel. Pretty wild, right? A little weird. That's literary fiction. Very weird. There is there's literally so much going on here that it would take me forever to talk about it all, but I can touch on the themes and some cool things that I noticed along the way and try to explain possibly a little bit about that scene at the end with the ghosts for you, because I'm a weirdo and I feel like I could probably explain it a bit. But first, for now, let's just start with kind of a rundown on what's going on in my point of view. So first off, I think this book is about a lot of things, just so many different things. But one of them is about voices of people who have been hurt and people who have been through pain and grief, mostly because of Richie, but also Leonie, who we follow, who is an interesting character because she's not someone that we really like, and she's not someone who's a good person, because it's almost like her pain of losing Given just never allowed her to be a full person. And Jojo talks about that pain at the very end. He says he thinks he understands now why why she is the way she is because of that grief and pain. And I think it's because Mam died and he's experiencing that grief for the first time and that anger at the world. And he feels like he wants to ignore what's going on, like Leonie does, and to get high and do all those things that she does, all the avoiding, like coping mechanisms. But instead he goes on walks because he's a bit more, I don't know, mature maybe. And he's just trying to process it in his own time. And I also think there's an issue in this book with the slaves and the history. There's this moment where Mam tells Leonie about how the magic in their blood is like a river through the generations. And I think that you could say that part of this book is trying to make a point about how history is like that too, and how you can feel the pain from the past and the losses from the past and the emotions from the past tumble into their lives because of the years of pain. That there are repercussions from events that happened long ago that we still feel today. And I think it's such a poignant read, especially for this time in the light of Black Lives Matter and stuff like that, because it's really hard to read a story where a 13-year-old boy gets a gun shoved in his face because he reaches for a bag that his grandfather made him. It's so heavy and poignant, and it says a lot about history and trauma and pain and grief and how it affects us in small ways and big ways. So while one of the themes is grief and pain, I think the other really big part of this story is coming of age, because grief and pain is a part of that. I mean, from the very first part of the book, the very first sentence says, from Jojo's point of view, "I like to think I know what death is." And then the very last chapter is about Mam dying. So I think along the way of this book, he realizes he doesn't know as much as he did. I mean, at the very beginning, he can't handle the goat. He has to go inside. And he starts to grow up and he starts to see things the way that he should see them. And he starts to see Richie and feel Richie's life story. And he grows and he has a coming of age in this story. And it's about his coming of age. And in a way, it's about Richie's coming of age too, but I'll get to that. Richie tells him in the car about a third of the way through that Jojo doesn't understand three things. He doesn't know anything about home, love, or time. And I think that's a good place to start with some of the big themes of this novel. So another big theme of this is love. What is love? What does it mean? To Richie, Pop is the one who loves him through his care and attention and the things he does. And he watches Pop make sandwiches for Jojo. And Jojo knows what love means through Pop and also through Kayla. And he also knows what it kind of isn't through Leonie and Michael. And he's trying to make sense of what love is. And I think that Pop is the most lovable source of love, which is so cute because he's so stoic and still. But there are so many young characters who depend on him and see him as just like a source of love and home. But it's just so nice. But Jojo also sees the love between Michael and Leonie, and he knows that love is just a little bit twisted, just a little wrong. And we get that through the novel because Leonie's obsessed with Michael, like Mam says, and they have fights a lot and they argue for no reason. They hit each other. The process of trying to figure out what love is and the ramifications of Jojo's love for Kayla is something that he has to battle with through the story because I mean, he gets a gun shoved in his face and his first thought is, Kayla, I hope he don't shoot her, right? So it's just one of those things where Jojo really gets shown in his face what love is. And it's not Leonie. Leonie doesn't love him. Love is the thing between him and Kayla, between Pop and him. Love is doing something for someone else rather than you. And it's just there's just so much I could say about this book. I feel really rambly about it, so I'm sorry. And Richie tells us too that we talk about home, right? So Richie says that home for him is not where his home actually was, not with his family, because it wasn't somewhere that felt safe to him. His mom didn't really care for him. He says that home is where you want to sink into the ground, where you feel loved. And so finding your home is something more complicated than just where you sleep, especially for ghosts, because this is this whole thing of finding home for the ghosts. And that is somewhere far away from them that they can't seem to reach because something is holding them back and they want to be there and hear the song of this home, but they can't quite make it out. But they still crowd around Jojo's home because here Kayla and Jojo and Pop have a home, and I think that they feel that. and Kayla singing to them, it's almost this moment of like, no, it's not perfect, but maybe they're trying to make the best of it, or maybe this is as close to home as they can be. And Jojo, I think, too, at the end, he realizes that home has nothing to do, like, with, I don't know, it has nothing to do with Michael or Leonie or their car. Home for Jojo is Kayla and Pop, and it's just, it's love. Home is love. So it's adorable that Richie names these three things, and that by the end of the novel, Jojo kind of understands them. He understands love, home, and time. And on that topic of time, Richie says Jojo doesn't understand time. I think that's a really interesting, I keep saying interesting, but it's so interesting, like, phrase, because in a way I think he means death, but I think he means more than that too, because another theme of this novel is that time is not really linear, and that time affects not only what happened back then, but what happens today, and it affects our future. And timelines are kind of all happening at the same time. That's why Richie's able to be where Jojo is. And so time works in a really interesting way in this novel. We don't really get like it shoved in our face, but we're told about the flow of time and how time passes. And it has to do with death, because Jojo doesn't understand quite how it works until the end with Ma'am, and Richie and Given, all these timelines coinciding at once. So time is just another part of his life, of the world, that Jojo didn't understand until he was, affronted with it, until he saw it himself, until he experienced it, until he was in a room with his dead uncle, his grandfather's dead friend, and his mom who was dying, or not mom, but Ma'am who was dying. So it's just, the coming of age part of this story is really deep, and it connects a lot to the overall themes of the book. And Richie himself goes through a coming of age because he doesn't understand why he died. He doesn't get it. He died before he could come of age. And so this book too is like him following this family, seeing what he missed, understanding more of the world. He says Jojo doesn't understand. I don't think he understands fully either. The ghosts don't, and that's why they're stuck, because they don't fully understand. They didn't get to finish their life story and understand things the way that maybe Jojo will or does. So in the novel, there's also smaller themes that really hold a lot of weight. So one of them is water, which I think is really cool. Water operates as a sort of like mythical, almost mystical energy that they seem to understand. Pop's name is River, for one. Jojo's grandmother is referred to as the saltwater woman by the ghosts, and he talks about how there's like salt water in the veins of the kids and stuff. Leonie has a dream that her family's drowning and she's trying to keep them up. And on their trip, Jojo even tips his head back and like drinks from the rain. So everything is just about water. Everything is water. Even the last sentence of this book is about how Kayla understands water and remembers the water of the womb. And it's like water's in our souls, and there's an understanding of something more important than just water, and there's like properties of it that can do more than what we think it does. The concept of water and it meaning something is really interesting, and it leads me to my next point about this book. Just something cool about it is Leonie. So I don't like Leonie, but I think it's impressive that a writer can write a character that I don't like and have her be someone that I pity, and someone that I feel bad for, and someone that I don't mind reading from the point of view of, even though she's such like a non-person I want to hang out with. Like I would never want to hang out with Leonie. But I appreciate her as a character and the effort it took to write her, because characters like that are really difficult to write, I bet. It was great being in her head, because it was such a strange view of the world. And I like too, because the only person in the book who doesn't like water is Leonie. She has that dream where her family's drowning. And I think that's a really good analogy for Leonie and how she feels about life and her own family's power, because it's clear to me that Leonie has the power that her mom was talking about. She sees Given, and she even sees a little bit of Richie at the very end. But the problem with Leonie, I think, is that she doesn't take that seriously. She doesn't believe it. She thinks Given is like a product of her brain. She doesn't think he's a ghost at all through the whole book, but like her mom would have, but she doesn't. It's almost like there's just a part of her that she can't accept. And I think that is really accurate. It's the drowning, like her whole family's in water and she's trying to keep them up, but she can't. It's almost like she has a fear of them becoming like her, of them becoming the part of her that she doesn't like, the part that's water. Because Leonie is just this like self-hating, self-loathing person. And I think that she doesn't want any of her family to be anything like her. So when they become like her in any way, I think she gets really hard with them because she wants them to just be Michael. She's just such a broken person. And so I really like that she's in this book. I like that we get her perspective because that was a really interesting choice. And I think it adds a lot to the book because Jojo doesn't even fully understand Leonie, and Leonie doesn't really fully understand him either, not even at the very end. So I think it was good to have in there. I think it was meaningful. Oh, also something interesting that I really liked about Leonie and the way that Jesmyn Ward worked her character into this is that if you remember, Pop had this moment that made me think of Leonie when he was describing his story to Jojo about the dogs, how their master Kinney escaped and how the warden made Pop chase him down with the dogs. And he said that the dogs refused to chase their master. They just went in circles. They were confused. They didn't want to chase the one who fed them, their mother. Like they could not do it. And it popped into my head that Mam compares Leonie to a dog. And I think that is so interesting. And I feel like it has to be on purpose because everything that people do, everything she did in this book seems very purposeful to me. And so it makes me think that it might be a metaphor for the fact that, for several things. For one, it might be the metaphor that she is the dog runner for Michael. Like she's just at his side doing what he says all the time. But even further down, I think you could make the argument, it's a little bit, roundabout, but I think you could make it there, that the dogs refused to chase their master, despite the fact that it could have been bad news for them. Like if the warden had decided that that wasn't cool, he could have killed those dogs, right? Like, that's their job, and they did not do it. And I think that's interesting because Leonie is, in a way, also doing that. She's like putting herself and the things that she needs to do at risk for Michael because she just can't not follow him. So it's a little bit roundabout, but stay with me. So if her job as a mother is to care for her children and pay attention to them, and I like to think of the house scene when they're in the house and Michael's fighting his father. She doesn't leave at first. And then she looks over at Jojo and Jojo's mad at her because he's like, why did you bring us here? Like, you should be not here with us right now, basically, is how I perceive that. And then she grabbed their hands and she sat outside with them and she's sitting outside. She's like, I should drive home, but I can't. It's like she wants to protect her kids. That's what her nature's telling her to do. Like these dogs' natures are to hunt things, to kill things. But she can't follow her instincts when Michael's around because it's Michael, it's her master. She has to follow what he says. So it's so interesting. I think you could make the argument that he kind of leads her astray and that he is not good for her and he's part of the reason why she can't get over her grief, why she can't be a full person. And it's not anything that he's doing. He's not a bad guy. I mean, he's not a great guy. He's not like bad. It's just that they're kind of toxic together. They just make each other both like a little worse. Like she's like, he just got out of prison and she immediately like shoves drugs in his face. And at first he shakes his head no, and then he gets high with her at Al's house. So it's just one of those things where they're both just a little bit bad for each other. They both stop each other from being what they could be. So I think that's really cool, that connection. Antithetical to the theme of water, the motif, I guess. There's also the theme of like dirt and sand and ground and the opposite of it and the wrongness of it. So there's the idea of land, which isn't necessarily bad, but then there's that dirt that Pop and Richie talk about, the dirt of Parchman that you can't get out of your head and you feel like you're eating it and you just can't, you're breathing it and it's in your brain and it like goes inside you and there's nothing you can do to get out of it. And Richie feels that way, and when he dies, instead of flying, he falls into the dirt and he goes into this like cave, and I feel like that's wrong. He's not supposed to be there. It's not his fault. It's just the way he was killed and the way his spirit has remained is wrong because it's not supposed to be that way. When he talks about the island, it's surrounded by water, and yet his death and his ghostly apparition is doing everything wrong. He's holed up in the dirt and the ground. And Michael too is so interesting because like Leonie, he's opposite the rest of the family in his view of dirt and ground. He mentions to Jojo that he found a love for gardening at Parchman, which is crazy because like slaves did not want to work that ground and Michael loved it. So it's just so wild. It's almost like it's supposed to show the difference between Michael and Pop, Michael and Richie, how he's different, how he doesn't feel that wrongness the way that they do, maybe. It's not necessarily a bad thing to garden, but it's just that he's different from the rest of the family. It's just the way it is. And this book, too, like I said, is so rife with racial tensions and differences in privilege. And I think it's done so well in little small things like that and just their differences and the way they see things like in opposite ways. I think, too, that that's really called into view with the Parchman stories. So like all those stories about like the dogs and the runners and like the long line and like people escaping, like that was stuff that actually happened at Parchman that Jesmyn Ward found in her research. And it's just, it makes the book all that much more like heavy and poignant and meaningful. And so this book is just rife with so many themes and thoughts and feelings, and all of them intercede in such beautiful ways. I know I'm fangirling. I'm really sorry, but it's true. I really like the book. Oh, and another thing I noticed. Okay, I noticed so many things. With literary fiction, you have to remember a lot of this is subjective. So the connections that I'm making, they could be connected, but their meanings are really, I think, subjective based on what you took from the novel. So keep in mind that when you read this book, it might mean something completely different to you. But to me, I noticed some of these things. And one of them, too, is that Pop and Leonie are both so different because they both seem to have this, they're the same but different. You can see how she's his child, but that something went wrong, and how love comes from Pop but not from Leonie, because they both have this need to like protect, and to help. And like it's just that Leonie won't remove Michael from her life because he's bad for her and bad for her children, despite the fact that she should. Pop does things that hurt him because he's willing to do the absolute worst things to protect them and care for them. So Leonie can't even get Michael out of her life. Like Pop full on kills Richie because it's better for him than being torn apart, and Pop can do nothing to save him. So it's one of those things where like they both have that instinct to protect, but in Leonie it's like she wants to protect herself. And for Pop, it's like he wants to protect everybody else. It's almost like they both have that same instinct, but Leonie has turned it in, whereas Pop has it for everyone. And so I just really liked that juxtaposition. Lastly, in this book, some themes that I noticed, there's stuff like there's voodoo and hoodoo and stuff like that. And I read that Jesmyn Ward did a lot of research so that she could get that right. And obviously, I think that works with the magical realism. Like, Ma'am is very that way with, like, her grease bags. I think it's grease. I'm sorry if it's not. I've only ever read it before, I just realized. But she has that, and she can hear things, and she has that cool, like, mystery and power. And Pop does, too. He makes that back for Jojo. So there's that feeling of, like, spirits and balance. And since this family kind of lives between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead, they operate in their like own bubble. And it was cool to see how that bubble is both a gift and a burden. And that burden is that they can see, Jojo, for example, and Kayla can see the ghosts of violent deaths, So like it's that thing where since they live in this area and they have this ability, they see more and they feel more, and they have to live with that. And I think that you could really make an argument that that is the experience of Black community in America and elsewhere, is that they see things that possibly others don't see, and that there's a burden that comes with that knowledge. And so I thought that's the way I think magical realism is supposed to work, is to kind of create like a large analogy. And I think that that's very cool. Now at the end, I said I would explain a little bit about the dead, but I think that goes into the title actually. So I want to talk about the title. Sing, Unburied Sing. I think that's such an interesting title because it's obviously telling the dead to sing, but it's not telling the dead like just the dead. It's saying the undead, the people who aren't buried, the ones who weren't buried because they were drowned or killed or burned. Like they should sing their issues and they should sing their problems And along with that, there's the theme of how the island of like happy ghosts, that's how I'm putting it. This is much more beautiful in the book. I'm like, island of happy ghosts. They're singing the whole time and they can just hear the song, but they can't make it over there. And I think it's so cool because it's almost like Jesmyn Ward is telling a story about how these ghosts have to learn to create their own songs and how these songs operate compared to the songs we expect to hear. So it's like how their violent deaths they create a song, but it's not quite the song it should be. And they still have a story and they need to sing it. And they've done nothing wrong. I don't know. It's just like the story boils down to the fact that Jojo and Kayla and even Leonie operate as a sort of guide for the dead and a sort of listening board for them. And we learn their stories through Jojo and Kayla and Leonie, and their stories affect all of them. And they create this change and this growth for Jojo and for Richie. And it creates this, the knowledge of that allows them to find some sort of happiness, even if it's not the end result of where they should be, just because they just can't get there. Richie's like, I thought I would be there whenever I heard the story, but he just can't because that's the way things are. It's a kind of a downer, but it's nice in a way because all these ghosts are here because they feel the warmth coming from Jojo's family. So that scene at the very end where Kayla sings to them, I think that's important because she almost sees more than Jojo does. She seems to like hear his thoughts and like, understand what's going on. And I don't know, it's just one of those things where like she seems to be able to sing a song to them that appeases them despite the violence of their deaths because she's been listening to them and they just want to be listened to. They want to be heard. They want to be comforted. And Kayla does that. So I don't know. It's very cool. I also think it's nice that it ends with her because she also went through growth. I mean, she has her own agency at the very end when at the beginning she just had to rely on everyone for everything. I mean, she's still 2 and 3, but at the very end she's standing on her own and she's singing. So it's just nice and it's beautifully written. And I just really like this story. Every single line is so gorgeous and meaningful and powerful. And, I think you might have to read it in little doses because I feel like if you read it all in one day, you might feel like a little sad because it is a heavy sort of like topic. But there are happy things too. There's Kayla and Jojo's relationship. There's some funny moments like when Kayla peeks on the car right after Leonie says she's fine. And it's just, it all ends on a good note with Pop and Kayla and Jojo just walking through the forest and Kayla comforting the souls of these lost people. So I really like it. It's almost like a long poem. And I think if you have a chance, I urge you to read it because I think that you can't hate it. It's just so nice to read. It's like, it's just like, I want to say it's like music for your eyes, like for your brain, like if you were reading it. And she has other works too that I really like. If you want more Jesmyn Ward, she wrote this book called Salvage the Bones, which is about a family in the lead up and then wake of Hurricane Katrina. And it's also beautifully written and there's also so much going on. And actually the characters in that book make a small cameo in this one, which I got really excited about. And so that one was the one that won her that award in 2011. So if you read this one and you find yourself wanting more of her because you maybe will, like I did, everything I've read by her has been so amazing. And all of her words have such a rhythm to it and it's so pleasing to read. So I don't know. I'm fangirling, but what can you do? I read to you one of my favorite books. It's just I'm going to be a teeny bit biased, but whatever. In any case, thank you for tuning in again today for this episode of Bad Book Club. If you enjoyed the episode, if you're having a good time, if you've been listening, if you're new to it, please subscribe and review on iTunes. It's very easy. It's down at the button. Just click those little stars and write me a little note. If you want to support the podcast, you can buy our merchandise on our website or buy this book on our website. And I'll see you next week for a talk about The Secret Life of Bees, which I've never read before, but I've heard it's very good. My theme for the month of November is kind of stories with like families and love and anything that has the word give in it because it's Thanksgiving. And my theme for Christmas is similar to me, Christmassy and lovey-dovey. So get excited, and I have some great episodes coming up. Thank you for giving me that week to kind of chill. It was super helpful, and I'm really prepared to hang out with you guys and see what's going on, and I'll see you next time for The Secret Life of Bees. Okay, goodbye, lovelies. Goodbye.